Savage, live for us in South Carolina. Thank you for that. For the next 20 minutes or so, I am going to do something to help navigate everyone through this case. I'm going to go over the video of this shooting, critical moment by critical moment, with a team of experts who know all too well what evidence says and where it leads. HLN legal analyst Joey Jackson is with me. Former federal prosecutor Dan Schorr is here, and law enforcement expert Dennis Root, who has trained officers in how to properly use deadly force. Welcome to all three of you. I want to start by basically sort of going frame by frame, gentlemen, if you'll permit me. Take a look at this first image that's frozen. It's at the very beginning. It's about a split second of the video, and it shows that there is some kind of struggle that went on between this victim and the police officer. They are in some way connected at this very point. I'll ask you, Dan, right away, what significance does this play, if any?
Well, there's some kind of struggle, and that precipitated the events that happened later. They didn't justify them by any means, but that's what led to the beginning of the confrontation. There was a chase first that led them to this area. There was originally a traffic stop. Now, they might be fighting over a taser. Based on the officer's statements, we know a taser was involved. He later said that the suspect grabbed his taser from him.Maybe that's what he's referring to, but in no way does it justify what we see later. All
right, so let's move on. The struggle, actually, we're going to play this out for you in a slow motion so you can really get a clear sense, because it happens very, very quickly. You can see a dark object falling, in fact, right there under the highlight. There's a dark object. There's another dark object that flies to the back of the officer. It's highlighted as well. And that rolls off sort of behind. Then you can see the officer who had his hand on his gun at the very last moment of the struggle is now clearly getting that gun in position. Joey Jackson?
Ashley, what happens when you evaluate this, you have to evaluate it in three different ways. The first thing is you have to look at the immediacy of the threat. And when you see the threat moving away from the officer, it becomes very problematic. Why? Because then the threat is no longer immediate and posed to the officer. The second thing is now you look to the proportionality of the force. For whatever reason, Ashley, the officer is drawing his firearm, and perhaps you could say it would be justified in drawing the firearm to say, hey, freeze, stop, do what you do. The discharging of it is what becomes problematic. Final point, Ashley, and that is you look at the reasonableness of the conduct also. And certainly in the drawing of the firearm and then beginning to discharge it at this point, is that reasonable under these circumstances? That's the problem.
And if I could ask our control room to just freeze that frame where you see the officer going for his gun, and there is sizable difference between 5 and 10 feet, depending. There's a lot of space between this officer and the victim in this case. Dennis Root, I want you to work with me on this actual shooting. In real time, the shooting takes about 10 seconds to play out. That may seem very quick, but that's an eternity for some people. So as this is playing out, I don't want this to be gratuitous at all. I want you, as a trained officer who trains others in the proper use of deadly force, to tell me what, if anything, where is the devil in the details? Where is there a possibility that this could be at all right? And we're going to roll the video while we're speaking of it.
You know, for me to be able to do that, unfortunately, I can't. There is a training concept that if somebody is an aggressor and they're pointing a taser weapon at the officer is justified in elevating his application of force because he could be incapacitated by the taser weapon. Clearly, the video shows that that is not the case in this particular event. So once the taser weapon is out of play and the person begins to flee from the officer's application, the shooting of the individual is unreasonable. There is nothing that I can find in the video that would justify the application of deadly force in this event. You know, there's no special circumstances known that I'm aware of about the individual that posed a threat to the public if they were allowed to escape. More importantly, if we know who he is and it's a family-related court bench warrant for, you know, child support, there's nothing to substantiate any kind of real-time threat to the officer or the community that would justify the application of deadly force. There's just no reason for the shooting.
Let me ask you this. The officer said immediately he grabbed my taser. Some people have said he stole, he took. The words are he grabbed. I've listened to it several times. He grabbed my taser. But there are other reports, Dennis, that show potentially the tase had already happened. The cord from the tase, it's almost imperceivable in some of the video and some of the pictures. But there are reports that say witnesses and the officer himself said he tased the man already. Does that not therefore render that taser useless, not dangerous? Even if the man took the taser, it's been used. It can no longer present a threat, right?
Well, once the cartridge has been discharged, once he's fired the taser weapon, the probes can't be reset into the cartridge. So what you basically have, without replacing the cartridge, you have a stun gun. It's a pain compliance tool. It can no longer be utilized to incapacitate the officer. So that variable in and of itself and the physical evidence at the scene will verify where it was deployed at, because they have little aphids that come out whenever the weapon is utilized. And these are little identifiers specific for that cartridge. That will show on the ground where the weapon was actually used. So if the cartridge had been discharged, now the officer knows that even if he had possession of it, it's not going to be incapacitating to the officer. So it is not a deadly force threat.
So Dan Schorr, is there anything that this officer could use in his own defense to actually convince anyone that in his mind, because this is always the standard, in his mind he felt that there was some kind of a threat either to himself or to others as this man was running? Perhaps something the man said to him, perhaps a school across the street. That is not a fact pattern here. I don't know what's across the street, but what could be a defense?
So the Supreme Court standard is an officer can use deadly force with a fleeing suspect if there's probable cause to believe they pose a threat of serious physical injury or death to someone else. There's nothing on this videotape that suggests anything of the sort. Now, if there's facts that we don't know where the suspect mentioned that he was about to harm people, that might be a factor, but there's no evidence of that. If you just look at the videotape, it's shocking, it's disturbing, it seems like completely unnecessary shooting, and that's why he's been charged with murder.
And it certainly looks to the naked eye indefensible even at this early hour. Joey Jackson, in a moment I want you to ponder something else, and that is what happened after the shooting, immediately after and within the ensuing minutes. We're certainly not finished with this breakdown of the shooting and this video. Up next, we're going to get these three guests to look with their very trained eyes at what happened when the police officer then went over to the now slumped shooting victim. And then there's also the unarmed victim's family. They watched Walter Scott gunned down on video. And say whatever the shooter's story, the pictures do not lie. Their heartbreak, their disbelief, and their words as they approached the press, that's all coming up.
That's it. Good job.